After my divorce, it seemed as though the vibrant hues of my life had dulled. Each day morphed into a tedious loop of interactions with just myself. I had become used to being alone, with solitude as my quiet, unassuming companion, occupying every moment. Yet deep down, I realized I craved something more, something that would rekindle my zest for life. "Mom, you have to come," Samuel said one evening as he stood in the doorway of my apartment, radiating excitement, almost joy. "There's a literary event at our bookstore tonight, a private gathering for insiders. You've always enjoyed these things, and it would be great for you to get out of the house." I wanted to decline, citing my fatigue and desire for solitude. However, there was something in my son's expression that made me hesitate. He had never before invited me to join him anywhere. For a 20-year-old, this was quite unusual. But his smile made it clear I simply couldn't refuse. "Okay, Samuel, I'll come," I finally said, attempting to mask the uncertainty in my voice as we entered the store. The relaxed atmosphere and vibrant energy struck me immediately. Young people were scattered around, laughing, chatting, and discussing books with such enthusiasm that it felt like I had stepped into an entirely different world. I felt out of place, as if my presence here was an error. Sensing my discomfort, Samuel quickly approached me. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, leaning closer to shield us from the noise. "Let me introduce you to Ethan. He's a good friend of mine from work." I nodded, trying to conceal my bewilderment. At that moment, I had no idea that meeting Ethan would turn everything upside down. He was taller than me, with thick, dark hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to delve into my very soul. Ethan extended his hand, offering a smile that was both friendly and a little daring. "Clara, nice to meet you," he said, his voice warm and melodic, instantly calming my nerves. "Nice to meet you too, Ethan," I responded, shaking his hand. The warmth of his grip lingered longer than I expected. Surprisingly, conversing with him felt effortless. We discussed books, travel, and art, with him listening intently, his eyes sparkling with interest. It felt as though he genuinely cared about my thoughts and feelings. He was straightforward and sincere, but there was an enigmatic quality in his gaze that I couldn't quite pinpoint. "You talk about literature as if it's more than just a pastime," he remarked, and I sensed a subtle challenge in his words, as if he believed books were essential to my existence. I smiled, taken aback by how accurate he was. For me, books had always represented more than just words on a page. "They're a way for me to understand myself," I replied, feeling my heart race a bit. Ethan's intense gaze was fixed on me, and I realized I welcomed his attention. How long had it been since someone found me interesting? As I left the bookstore later that evening, the chilly wind hit my face, leaving me feeling both bewildered and exhilarated. A forgotten flame sparked within me, something buried deep beneath layers of habits and fears. I couldn't pinpoint what had triggered this feeling. Was it the encounter itself or Ethan? Either way, I knew that this night would remain etched in my memory for a long time. A few days after that meeting at the bookstore, Ethan occupied my thoughts constantly. There had never been space for randomness in my life. Everything was meticulously planned and organized. But now, it felt like chance had barged in, disrupting my carefully crafted order. His gaze, his words, even the timbre of his voice haunted me. I felt foolish. A grown woman shouldn't get flustered over a young man, especially not her son's friend. Still, thoughts of Ethan kept coming back to me. That day, I decided to take a stroll along the riverbank to clear my mind. The air was crisp and fresh, and the soothing sound of the flowing river, combined with the swirling golden leaves, only heightened my slight unease. I ducked into a small cafe I often frequented to warm up with a cup of hot tea. Inside, the atmosphere was cozy and inviting. The aroma of freshly baked pastries wafted through the air, tempting me to forget my worries, even if just for a moment. And then I spotted him. Ethan was at a corner table, absorbed in a book, as if the world around him had faded away. I froze, but he had already looked up and noticed me. His face brightened with an unexpected smile, as if my arrival brought him joy. "Clara," he called, waving me over. I hesitated for a moment, but then, overcoming my internal resistance, I walked to his table. "What a surprising coincidence," I said, trying to appear calm, though I felt a flutter of nerves within me. "I guess we're both looking for a quiet spot to think." He smirked, closing his book. "How's your day going?" "Unusual," I replied, barely suppressing a smile. I didn't expect to see a familiar face here. We began to chat, this time delving into deeper and more personal topics. Ethan opened up about his favorite books, his journey of self-discovery through literature, and how he lost then regained his faith in humanity. I shared my own tales, laughing at the absurd situations from my past, and suddenly, it felt effortless to be around him, as if I had become the girl who once believed in dreams. Then Ethan said he had a surprise for me, and I tensed slightly. He pulled a small, worn collection of poems from his bag and handed it to me. "I found this recently in a secondhand bookstore," he explained, "and I thought you might like it." As I opened the book, I noticed a bookmark on a page featuring a poem I had known by heart since my youth. Ethan urged me to read it aloud. Initially, I felt embarrassed, but eventually, I succumbed to his insistence and began to recite the familiar words, which suddenly resonated with new meaning. My voice quivered slightly with excitement. When I finished, Ethan leaned closer and whispered, "Your words," his voice barely rising above the cafe's din. "Your words sound like music," he said, and as I looked up, I found myself caught in his gaze. There was something about his eyes that made me freeze, as if the world around us had vanished. He leaned in closer, and I felt his hand brush against mine. My heart raced, and in an instant, his lips softly grazed mine. The kiss was featherlight, almost imperceptible, like the delicate flutter of a butterfly's wings. Yet inside, everything shifted dramatically. Though the moment was fleeting, it was infused with such warmth and tenderness that my fears and doubts temporarily faded away. I quickly pulled back, feeling a rush of confusion and embarrassment, but he continued to gaze at me with a curious blend of surprise and satisfaction. "Ethan," I began, uncertain of what to say, but he simply smiled, as if everything that had transpired was entirely natural. "Sorry if that was too much," he said. Though his tone carried no hint of regret, it felt completely right. I found myself at a loss for words. That kiss had stirred feelings within me that I had long buried. Standing up, I mumbled that I needed to leave and hurried toward the exit, my heart still racing as I stepped outside. The cold air jolted me back to reality. I felt a mix of embarrassment and excitement. It had been ages since anyone had looked at me the way Ethan had, and although I knew I should let it all go, something inside whispered that this was just the beginning. Days slipped by, yet the memory of that light, almost fleeting kiss lingered in my mind. I attempted to convince myself it was merely a coincidence, a momentary lapse that shouldn't be taken seriously. But every morning, as I opened my eyes, my thoughts returned to Ethan again and again, his smile, his eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. I tried to steer clear of places where we might cross paths, but fate had other plans. One evening, as I was heading home from work, my phone rang suddenly. It was Ethan. I hesitated about whether to answer, but before I could think it over, I found myself saying, "Hello, Clara," he said, his voice soft and soothing. "I know you might be avoiding me, and I get it, but I'd like to invite you to an event on the rooftop of an old building. I think you'll love it. Just give me a chance." I hesitated, conflicting emotions churning within me, the desire to see him again clashing with the fear of what that might mean. But his voice, filled with confidence and warmth, swayed me. "All right," I murmured, almost to myself, hardly believing my own words. "I'll come." By the time I arrived at the location, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. The staircase leading to the roof was old and creaked under my feet, but I pressed on, driven by curiosity and an inexplicable attraction. When I reached the top, I spotted Ethan by the parapet, gazing out over the city. The wind tousled his hair, and his eyes sparkled with an air of mystery. "Thank you for coming," he said as he turned to face me. His sincerity was so palpable that I couldn't help but smile. We approached the edge of the roof, where a stunning view of the city unfolded before us. Ethan began to share stories about his childhood, how he lost his parents in an accident when he was still young, growing up in foster homes and learning to navigate a harsh world that offered him no mercy. As I listened, I realized I was standing before a man who had endured more than many do in a lifetime. "Sometimes I feel like I don't belong to this world," he confessed quietly. "Like I'm merely an observer searching for my place among strangers." His words caught me off guard, and I felt my heart constrict with compassion and an instinctive urge to comfort him. I wanted to speak, but instead, I simply rested my hand on his shoulder. He turned to me, and in his eyes, I saw the same uncertainty that mirrored my own. We were so close that I could feel his breath on my skin. My heart raced, and in that moment, he slowly leaned in to kiss me. This kiss was entirely different. It was deeper, more passionate, as if it held years of unexpressed emotions and desires. I felt his hands slide gently over my shoulders, drawing me closer, and all my fears, doubts, and rational thoughts melted away. In that instant, he was both tender and insistent, and I found myself losing myself in his warmth, in this beautiful madness. It felt as if the world around us had come to a halt. There was only this moment. The city spread out beneath us, the air filled with the scent of freshness and the coolness of spring. And us. I didn't ponder what would come next. I simply allowed myself to exist in this moment. When the kiss finally ended, I felt my knees weaken slightly. Ethan was watching me, his eyes brimming with tenderness and a quiet triumph. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "You don't need to," he replied, smiling. "I just wanted to be near you." But at that instant, a chilling realization washed over me. Reality crashed down with overwhelming force. I was a mother, significantly older than him, and a friend to his best friend. What was I doing? This was madness. I stepped back, creating space between us. "Ethan, this is wrong," I said, striving to maintain my composure, though my inside screamed otherwise. "We shouldn't pursue this." He didn't respond immediately. A flicker of disappointment crossed his features, but he didn't attempt to stop me. He merely nodded and said quietly, "If that's how you feel, I understand." I turned away, desperately trying to cling to what little resolve I had left as I descended the stairs. Inside, I was torn apart by conflict. That kiss had been exquisite, but a part of me insisted I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Yet as I stepped out onto the street, I was aware of one thing. This wasn't the end. I could try to escape it, but a part of me already recognized I wouldn't be able to resist this pull for long. Several days passed since that evening on the rooftop, but thoughts of Ethan refused to leave me. Each time I closed my eyes, I recalled that kiss, his gaze, his words. It felt as though I stood on the edge of a cliff, my heart shouting, "Jump," while my mind screamed, "Stop. Don't do it." I tried to suppress these feelings, but they only intensified. I resolved not to see him again, feeling that it was time to put an end to this once and for all. I was certain it was the right decision. Thoughts of Ethan haunted me, yet I understood that falling for someone younger than my own son would be inappropriate. It felt wrong, unfair to Samuel. I couldn't jeopardize our relationship for the sake of a fleeting passion. However, Ethan was persistent. He continued to send me brief messages, checking in on how I was feeling, sharing his thoughts, and discussing the books he was reading. These messages were simple and lighthearted, making it impossible for me not to respond. Eventually, he started showing up at places I frequented during my morning runs, including the cafe I visited every Saturday. I tried to convince myself it was mere coincidence, but an unsettling anxiety began to creep in. One evening, when I returned home, I found Samuel waiting for me in the kitchen, his expression grim and his eyes flashing with irritation. "Mom, can I have a minute?" he asked, not meeting my gaze as he nervously twisted his coffee cup in his hands. "Of course, Samuel. What's wrong?" I replied, attempting to sound calm, even though I sensed an uncomfortable conversation was about to unfold. "You've been acting strangely lately." You're always off somewhere and hardly talk to me anymore." He shot me a quick look. Is this about Ethan? I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Had he uncovered something about Ethan? I tried to keep my tone casual. "We just been chatting a bit. He's your friend, Samuel. Why are you so worried?" His voice took on a firm, almost accusatory tone. "I overheard Ethan talking to one of his friends. He's not who he appears to be. He has problems, and I don't want him dragging you into his mess." A chill of fear gripped me. Could it all be true? I recalled those chance encounters, his persistence, those uncanny coincidences. "What kind of problems?" I asked, attempting to sound composed, but my voice wavered. Samuel responded sharply, "And not small ones. He's already tried borrowing money from friends several times, and now that he knows you're well off, Mom, I'm just afraid he's using you." His words hit me like a bolt of lightning. Could Ethan really be that manipulative? Was he with me only for financial gain? But everything about his behavior, his words, his gestures, were they all lies? "Samuel, I understand your concern," I said, trying to calm both him and myself. "But I don't think Ethan is capable of that. He's always been honest with me." "You don't know him at all, Mom," Samuel replied quietly but firmly. "I just ask you to be careful." Anxiety and fear churned within me. I couldn't believe Ethan could be like that, yet I also recognized that Samuel might be right. I needed to figure this out for myself. The next day, an anonymous letter arrived. It bore no signature, but its message was clear. "Be careful with Ethan. He's not who he claims to be." A chill ran down my spine. These words seemed to confirm Samuel's worries, yet I remained unsure whom to trust. That evening, I resolved to meet Ethan and speak openly with him. I couldn't continue living in doubt and suspicion. I needed to hear the truth from him directly. I sent him a message, asking to meet at our usual cafe. His response came swiftly. "Of course, Clara. I'll be there." Upon entering the cafe, I found Ethan already waiting. He stood up when he saw me, his eyes brightening with joy. But I couldn't muster a smile in return. Although his gaze was filled with warmth and tenderness, my doubts continued to torment me. "Ethan," I began, taking a seat across from him. "I need to know something. You owe me the truth." His expression shifted to one of seriousness. "What do you mean, Clara?" he asked cautiously. "About your problems, your debts, whether you might be using me for money." I tried to maintain a calm demeanor, but inside I was racked with pain and uncertainty. For a moment, he seemed taken aback. Then he composed himself. "I do have problems," he admitted quietly. "But I've never used you, Clara. Everything I've said has been true. My feelings for you are genuine. I just wanted you to be happy and to feel that life can be vibrant again." I studied him, searching for any hint of deception, but his eyes were open, sincere. Yet, something inside me resisted. I realized I was caught in a whirlwind, and there was no easy escape. After our conversation at the cafe, I returned home feeling conflicted. Ethan swore his feelings were real, that he wasn't trying to manipulate me, but I noted his hesitation when I mentioned money, the falter in his voice, the indecision in his answers. Could he truly be lying? And if so, what part of our encounters had been genuine? What about his words and those kisses that had reignited my spirit? That night, I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning as I pondered every possible outcome. Samuel wouldn't leave my mind, as if he sensed that something ominous was looming. By morning, I understood that I had to clarify the situation once and for all. I couldn't remain in limbo, not for myself, nor for my son. Soon, I received another anonymous letter. This time it contained photographs. Ethan conversing with a stranger who handed him an envelope, Ethan at an ATM withdrawing cash, Ethan dining with a woman in an upscale restaurant. Each image felt like further confirmation that he was living a double life. A cold knot tightened in my chest. Had I been so mistaken about him? Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to pay Ethan a surprise visit. I knew where he lived, but had never been to his home. It was a decisive step, yet one I felt was necessary. I needed to see him in his own environment, to truly understand who he was. As I approached his house, my heart raced. I knocked on the door, and almost immediately, I heard footsteps on the other side. Ethan opened the door, surprise and concern etched across his face. "Clara," he said, his voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I replied, "I need to talk to you, Ethan, and I want to do it here, now, without any masks or unspoken truths." Ethan stepped aside, inviting me in. His apartment was modest, even somewhat shabby, and it starkly contrasted with the lifestyle portrayed in the photographs from the letter. The air was filled with the scent of coffee and dust, while papers and books lay scattered across the table. "Listen, I understand how you feel," he said as he closed the door behind me. "But you need to trust me. I'm not who you think I am." "Trust you." I couldn't mask the bitterness in my voice. "Ethan, I received photographs of you with various people, women, and money. What's going on? Who are these people? Why didn't you tell me about them?" His face went pale, and confusion flickered in his eyes. "Photographs," he echoed, genuine alarm creeping into his tone. "Who sent you these?" I handed him the envelope containing the pictures. He examined them, pressing his lips into a thin line. A mix of fear and anger flickered across his face. "These are old acquaintances of mine," he explained slowly, choosing his words with care. "People I'd prefer not to deal with, but sometimes circumstances force you to. Yes, I have financial problems. I won't deny that. But I never used you for money, Clara. These people represent my debts, my shadow from the past that I'm trying to escape. They won't leave me alone." I stared at him, searching for any hint of deception, but his voice carried a sincerity that felt almost certain. Yet, everything inside me screamed that this couldn't be the whole truth. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you trust me with your problems?" I asked, desperately seeking answers. "I didn't want to involve you," he replied, his voice trembling. "You're so bright, so pure. I didn't want the shadows of my past to touch you." I didn't know how to say it. Just then, the apartment door swung open, and Samuel walked in, clearly agitated as if he had run all the way there. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Samuel, were you following me?" I blurted out. "I wanted to protect you," he nearly shouted. "I knew you'd meet him again." "Mom, he's lying to you, I know it." I overheard them talking. "They were discussing you about your money," he continued. Ethan raised his hands in a calming gesture. "Wait, Samuel, that's not true. You misunderstood." "I'm tired of trying to figure out what's true and what's a lie," I interjected, tears brimming in my eyes. "You said you have feelings for me, that you want to be with me. But now I don't know whether to believe it." Ethan stepped forward, reaching for my shoulder, but I instinctively took a step back. Pain flashed across his face. "Clara, please don't leave me. Give me a chance to explain," he pleaded, his voice hoarse and desperate. Yet, I felt a tightening inside me, as if I had been betrayed yet again. "I can't," I whispered. "I need time to think, to sort things out." I turned and walked out of the apartment calling out, "Samuel, follow me." Ethan didn't try to stop me. He merely watched me leave, his expression a mixture of loss and hopelessness. My heart was breaking, but I knew I could no longer live in this whirlwind of doubts and mistrust. I had to put an end to it. But where would I go?